By 23rd of May, India would have chosen its next government and its next prime minister. India would have also decided on the path it wants to walk on. Will religious nationalism become our dominant identity that unites us or perhaps divides us? And has secularism fallen by the wayside? In a piece titled The Battle for India's Soul, published in the Foreign Affairs magazine, author Milan Vaishnav raises some of these interesting questions, and he joins us for a conversation. Milan, thank you so much indeed for joining us today. We are at the fag end of what has been a month-long exhausting election campaign, and many people have called this a high-stakes election, where the idea of India being secular and diverse and plural is being put to test. What, to your mind, has this contest been about?
So I would certainly say that, one of the key things that's on the line in 2019 is this commitment to the idea of India. For the past 7 decades, by and large, India has adhered to the notion that it is the home for a diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-religious polity. And this is something that's sort of enshrined in the Constitution, that, India has found unity in its unparalleled diversity. And I think one of the questions for the voters today is whether India will adhere to that commitment or instead continue down a path of, toward the Hindu Rashtra, or a nation that's fundamentally determined by Hindu precepts and Hindu tenets, or will remain glued to the kind of secularism that in the past. And I think one of the questions which emerges is, we obviously know where the BJP stands on this question. It's an avowedly Hindu nationalist party, but it's unclear actually what the opposition stands for. And I think that's one of the big question marks going into these elections.
Milan, you point out that the Congress is trying to reclaim Hinduism in a sense from Hindutva, and you call it smart politics in your piece. Why do you think the Congress hasn't been able to present an equally compelling alternative idea?
Well, I think that the fact is that the concept or the construct of Nehruvian secularism is largely dead. And part of that is the responsibility of the Congress, which under the guise of secularism has often pandered to minorities, often cynically manipulated religious divisions to suit its own political purposes. The BJP has termed this pseudo-secularism. And so secularism today in India is something of a 4-letter word. It has become synonymous or coterminous with minority appeasement. And in a country that is 80% Hindu, I think the Congress Party feels that if it were to go down that lane, that would be electorally fatal for them. So instead, what they've tried to do is to wear their Hinduism on their sleeve as a badge of honor and say there is a distinction between Hinduism and Hindutva, that Hinduism is largely a tolerant, diverse, plural kind of religion, and it's not this kind of homogeneous, top-down, uniform, monolithic sort that the BJP is propagating. So as a result, secularism isn't really on the menu this time. It's amazing how that word is not being talked about, and how really the minority voter, the Muslim voter, is rather absent from most of our election discourse in 2019.
Okay, so whoever comes to power, secularism is dead, you say. But if the BJP is back, you also point out that we will see a resurgence of an extreme Hindu conservatism, and you call it Hindu traditionalism. Can you explain on what you mean by that?
Well, I think one has to make a distinction, actually, between the secularism of Nehru and Hindu nationalism, or Hindutva of Savarkar and Golwar and so on. Hindu traditionalism is in the middle. So they do not share the anti-minority or xenophobic tendencies of some on the far right, but they do believe that given that the country is that there should be a certain acceptance or reverence for Hindu precepts, whether it's traditional Hindu medicine, whether it's just forms of Hindu culture, whether it's the Hindi language itself. So I wouldn't put Hindu traditionalism on the extreme. I actually think it's somewhere in the middle. And if the opposition were to come to power this election, I actually think this is where the median member of the Congress Party and the regional opposition is. Now, if the BJP were to win this election, obviously, I think we would see more ground being made on the Hindu nationalism side, not necessarily on some of the big picture questions of Ram Mandir or Article 370 or the Uniform Civil Code, but things like rewriting textbooks to eliminate Islamic contribution or reduce Islamic contribution to Indian civilization, to not just ban cow slaughter, but to place bans on the consumption of beef, like we've seen. So I think those are some of the things which we've seen over the past 5 years, which could accelerate in the next 5.
I have one last question, Milan, and this is outside the piece that you've written. This has been by far the most vituperative and obnoxious political discourse that I have witnessed in a long time. Politicians across the board have indulged in mudslinging and name-calling and below-the-belt barbs. How does the world view this, you think? And we may be the world's largest democracy, but certainly not behaving like the most mature one.
Well, I think, frankly, what's happening in India is on par with what we see in many other democracies, including the United States, where we are seeing a kind of extreme partisan and social polarization in society. And political parties have managed to gain traction by catering not to the median voter, the voter in the middle, but really to the two extremes. And so the kind of name calling, the kind of dog whistling, the kind of ad hominem attacks that we've been seeing, unfortunately, are not unique to India. But I don't think it speaks well about the nature of an Indian electoral politics, especially when there are so many substantive issues on the line, whether it's employment, whether it's rural distress, whether it's questions of foreign policy and national security. I mean, these are large substantive issues that are going to determine the future of Indian society and Indian democracy. And rather than discussing some of these issues, we've descended, I think, into partisan name calling, and that doesn't serve anyone, least of all the Indian voter.
Milan, we leave it there. Many thanks indeed for joining us with your perspective. If you have been, thank you so much indeed for watching.